The Story of King Arthur and His Knights by Howard Pyle, the 1903 compilation. Now it fell upon a certain pleasant time in the springtime season that King Arthur and his court were making a royal procession through that part of Britain which lieth close to the forests of Usk. At that time the weather was exceedingly warm, and so the king and the court made pause within the forests under the trees in the cool and pleasant shade that the place afforded. And there the king rested for a while upon a couch of rushes spread with scarlet cloth. And the knights then present at that court were Sir Gawain, Sir Ewain, Sir Kay, Sir Pelleas, Sir Bedivere, Sir Caradoc, Sir Geraint, and Sir Bodwin of Britain, and Sir Constantine of Cornwall, and Sir Brandiles, and Sir Mata de la Porte, and there was not found anywhere in the world a company of such noble and exalted knights as these. Now as the king lay dowsing, and these worthies sat holding cheerful converse together at that place, there came a sudden and considerable bustle and stir upon the outskirts of the court, and presently there appeared a very sad and woeful sight. For there came thitherward a knight, sore wounded, and upheld upon his horse by a golden-haired page, clad in apparel of white and azure. And likewise the knight's apparel and the trappings of his horse were of white and azure, and upon his shield he bore the emblazonment of a single lily flower of silver upon a ground of pure azure. But the knight was in a very woeful plight, for his face was as pale as wax, and hung down upon his breast, and his eyes were glazed, and saw naught that passed around him, and his fair apparel of white and blue was all red with the blood of life that ran from a great wound in his side. And as they came upon their way, the young page lamented in such wise that it wrung the heart of those who heard him. Now as these approached, King Arthur aroused, and cried out, "Alas! What doleful spectacle is that which I behold? Now hasten ye, my lords, and bring succour to yonder knight. And do thou, Sir Kay, go quickly, and bring that fair young page hither, that we may presently hear from his lips what mishap hath befallen his lord." So certain of those knights hastened to the king's bidding, and gave all succour to the wounded knight, and conveyed him to King Arthur's own pavilion, which had been pitched at a little distance. And when he had come there, the king's chirurgeon had presently attended upon him, albeit his wounds are of a sort he might not hope to live to see a very long while. Meantime, Sir Kay brought that fair young page before the king where he sat, and the king thought that he had hardly ever seen a more beautiful countenance. And the king said, "I prithee tell me, Sir Page, who is thy master, and how come he in such a sad and pitiable condition as that which we have now just beheld?" "That will I so," said the youth. "Know that my master is entitled Sir Miles of the White Fountain, and that he cometh from the country north of where we are, at a considerable distance from this. In that country he is the lord of 7 castles and several noble estates, wherefore, as thou mayest see, he is of a considerable consequence. A fortnight ago he set forth with only me for his esquire, for he had a mind to seek adventure in such a manner as beseemed a good knight who would be errant. And we had several adventures, and in all of them my lord was entirely successful, for he overcame 6 knights at various places, and sent them all to his castle for to attest his valor unto his lady. At last this morning, coming to a certain place situated at a considerable distance from this, we came upon a fair castle of the forest, which stood in a valley surrounded by open spaces of level lawn, bedlight with many flowers of divers sorts. There we beheld 3 fair damsels who tossed a golden ball from one to another, and the damsels were clad in flame-colored satin, and their hair was the color of gold. And as we drew nigh to them they stinted their play, and she who was the chief of those damsels called out to my lord, demanding of him whither he went and what was his errand. To her my lord made answer that he was errant and in search of adventure. And upon this the 3 damsels laughed, and she who had spoken first said, "And thou art in search of adventure, Sir Knight? Happily I may be to help thee to one that shall satisfy thee to thy heart's content." Unto this my master made reply, "I prithee, fair damsel, tell me what that adventure may be, so that I may presently essay it." Thereupon this lady bade my master to take a certain path, and to follow the same for a distance of a league or a little more, and that he would then come to a bridge of stone that crossed a violent stream, and she assured him that there he might find adventure enough to satisfy any man. And so my master and I wended thitherward as thy damsel had directed, and by we came unto the bridge thereof she had spoken. And lo, beyond the bridge was a lonesome castle with a tall straight tower, and before the castle was a wide and level lawn of well-trimmed grass, and immediately beyond the bridge was an apple tree hung over with a multitude of shields. And midway upon the bridge was a single shield, entirely of black, and beside it hung a hammer of brass, and beneath the shield was written these words in letters of red: "Whoso smiteth this shield doeth so at his peril." Now my master Sir Miles, when he had read those words, went straight away to that shield, and seizing upon the hammer that had hung beside it, he smote upon it a blow so loud that it rang like thunder. Thereupon, as an answer, the portcullis of the castle was let fall, and there immediately came forth a knight, clad all from head to toe in sable armor, and his apparel and the trappings of his horse, all of the appointments thereof, were likewise entirely of sable. Now when that sable knight perceived my master, he came riding swiftly across the meadow, and so to the other end of the bridge. And when he had come there, he drew rein and saluted my master, and cried out, "Sir knight, I demand of thee why thou didst smite that shield. Now let me tell thee, because of thy boldness, I shall take away from thee thine own shield, and shall hang it upon yonder apple tree, where thou beholdest all those other shields to be hanging." Unto this my master made reply, "That thou shalt not do, unless thou mayest overcome me as knight to knight." And thereupon immediately he dressed his shield and put himself into array for an assault at arms. So my master and the sable knight, having made themselves ready for that encounter, presently drave together with might and main, and they met in the middle of the course, where my master's spear burst into splinters. But the spear of the sable knight held, and it pierced through Sir Miles, his shield, and it penetrated his side, so that both he and his horse were overthrown violently into the dust, he being so wounded so grievously that he could not arise again from the ground whereupon he lay. Then the sable knight took my master's shield and hung it up in the branches of the apple tree where the other shields were hanging, and thereupon, without paying further heed to my master or inquiring as to his hurt, he rode away into his castle again, whereof the portcullis was immediately closed behind him. So after that he had gone, I got my master to his horse with great labor, and straightway took him thence, not knowing where I might find harborage for him, until I came to this place. And that, my king, is the true story of how my master came to that mortal hurt which he hath suffered. Ha! By the glory of paradise, cried King Arthur, I do consider it a great shame that in my kingdom, and so near to my court, that strangers should be so discourteously treated as Sir Miles hath been, sir. For it is certainly a discourtesy for to leave a fallen knight upon the ground, without tarrying as to inquire as to his hurt or how grievous it may be, and still more discourteous it is to take away the shield of a fallen knight who hath done good battle. And so did all the knights of the king's court exclaim against the discourtesy of that sable knight. Then there came forth a certain esquire attendant upon the king's person, by name Griflet, who was much beloved by his royal master, and he kneeled before the king and cried out in a loud voice, I crave a boon of thee, my lord king. I do beseech thee that thou wilt grant it unto me. Then King Arthur uplifted his countenance upon the youth as he knelt before him, and he said, Ask, Griflet, and thy boon shall be granted unto thee. Thereupon Griflet said, It is this that I would ask. I crave that thou wilt make me a straightaway knight, and that thou wilt let me go forth and endeavor to punish this unkindly knight, by overthrowing him, and so redeeming those shields which he hath hung upon the apple tree. Then was King Arthur much troubled in his spirit, for Griflet was yet only an esquire, and altogether untried in arms. So he said, Behold, thou art yet too young to have to do with so potent a knight as the sable champion must be, who has thus overthrown so many knights without himself suffering any mishap. I prithee, dear Griflet, consider and ask some other boon. But young Griflet only cried the more, a boon, and thou hast granted it unto me. Thereupon King Arthur said, Thou shalt have thy boon, though my heart much misgiveth me that thou shalt suffer great ill and misfortune from this adventure. So that night Griflet kept watch upon his armor in a chapel of the forest, and in the morning, having received the sacrament, he was created a knight by the hand of King Arthur, and it was not possible for any knight to have a greater honor than that. Then King Arthur fastened the golden spurs upon Sir Griflet's heels with his own hand. So Griflet was made a knight, and having mounted his charger, he rode straightway upon his adventure, much rejoicing and singing for pure pleasure. And it was at this time that Sir Miles died of his hurt, for it is often so that death and misfortune befall some, whilst others laugh and sing for hope and joy, as though such grievous things as sorrow and death could never happen in the world wherein they live. Now that afternoon King Arthur sat waiting with great anxiety for word of that young knight, but there was no word until toward evening, when there came a hurrying to him certain of his attendants, proclaiming that Sir Griflet was returning, but without his shield and in such guise that he seemed as though a great misfortune had befallen him. And straightway thereafter came Sir Griflet himself, sustained upon his horse by only one hand by Sir Constantine, and upon the other by Sir Brandiles. And lo, Sir Griflet's head hung down upon his chest, for his fair new armor was broken and stained with blood and dust. So woeful was he that the appearance of King Arthur's heart was contracted with sorrow to behold that young knight in so pitiable a condition. So at King Arthur's bidding they conducted Sir Griflet to the royal pavilion, and there they lay him down upon a soft couch, And the king's chirurgeon searched his wounds, and found the head of a spear and the part of a shaft thereof were still pierced in Griflet's side, so that he was in most woeful and grievous pain. And when King Arthur beheld in what a perilous state Sir Griflet lay, he cried out, "Alas, my dear young knight, what hath happened to thee to bring thee into such a woeful condition as this I behold?" Then Sir Griflet, speaking in a very weak voice, told King Arthur how he had fared. And he said that he had proceeded through the forest until he had discovered the 3 beautiful damsels whereof the page of Sir Miles had spoken. And he said that these damsels had directed him to the manner in which he should pursue this adventure. And he said he had found the bridge whereupon hung the shield in the brazen mall, and that he had there beheld the apple tree hung full of shields. And he said that he had smote the shield of the Sable Knight with the brazen mall, and he said that the Sable Knight had thereupon come riding out against him. And he said that this knight did not appear of a mind to fight him. Instead he cried out to him in a great deal of nobleness that he was too young and too untried in arms to have to do with a seasoned knight. Wherefore he had advised Sir Griflet to withdraw from that adventure ere it was too late. But notwithstanding his advice, Sir Griflet would not withdraw, and declared that he would certainly have to do with the other knight in sable. Now at the very first onset of Sir Griflet's spear had burst into pieces, but the spear of the Sable Knight had held, and pierced through Sir Griflet's shield and into his side, causing him grievous wound whereof he had suffered. And Sir Griflet said the Sable Knight had then most courteously lifted him upon his horse again, though taking his shield, and then directed him upon his way, so that he had made shift to ride thither, though with great pain and dole. Then was King Arthur very woed and greatly disturbed in his mind, for indeed he loved Sir Griflet exceedingly well, wherefore he declared that he himself would now go forth to punish that Sable Knight, and for to humble him with his own hand. And though the knights of his court strove to dissuade him from that adventure, yet he declared that he with his own hand would accomplish that proud knight's humiliation, and that he would undertake the adventure, with God his grace, upon the very next day. Now, as soon as the birds first began to chirp, and the east to brighten with the coming of the daylight, King Arthur summoned his 2 esquires, and having with their aid donned his armor, and mounted a milk-white war-horse, he presently took his departure upon that adventure which he had determined upon. And indeed, it is a very pleasant thing for to ride forth on the dawning of a springtime day, for then the little birds do sing their sweetest song, all joining in one joyous melody, whereof one may scarce tell one note from another, so multitudous is that pretty roundelay. Then do the growing things of the earth, the fair flowers, the shrubs, and the blossoms upon the trees. Then doth the dew bespangle the sward as an incredible multitude of jewels of various colors. Then all is as the world sweet and clean as new, as though it had been fresh created for him who had come to roam abroad so early in the morning. So King Arthur's heart expanded with great joy, and he chanted a quaint song as he rode through the forest upon the quest of that knightly adventure. So about noontide he came to that part of the forest lands whereof he had heard of those several times before. For a sudden he discovered before him a wide and gently sloping valley. Adown ran a stream as bright as silver, and lo, the valley was strewn all over with infinite multitude of fair and fragrant flowers of diverse sorts. And in the midst of the valley there stood a comely castle, with tall red roofs and many bright windows, that it seemed to King Arthur that it was of a very fine castle indeed. And upon a smooth green lawn he perceived those 3 damsels clad in flame-colored satin, of whom the page of Sir Miles and Sir Griflet had spoken. And they played at ball with a golden ball, and the hair of each was of the hue of gold. And it seemed to King Arthur, as he drew nigh, that they were the most beautiful damsels that he had ever beheld in all his life. Now, as King Arthur came unto them, the 3 ceased tossing the ball, and she who was the fairest of all damsels demanded of him whither he went, and upon what errand he was bound. Then King Arthur made reply, "Ha, fair lady, whither should a belted knight ride upon such a day as this, and upon what business, other than to search of adventure such as beseemeth a knight of proper strength of heart and frame who would be errant?" Then the 3 damsels smiled upon the king, for he was exceedingly comely of face, and they liked him very well. "Alas, sir knight," said she who had spoken before, "I prithee be no such haste to undertake a dangerous adventure, but rather tarry with us for a day or 2 or 3, for to feast and make merry with us. For surely good cheer doth greatly enlarge the heart, and we enjoy the company of so gallant a knight as thou appearest to be. Yonder castle is ours, and all of this gay valley is ours, and those who have visited it are pleased, because of its joyfulness, to call it the Valley of Delight. So tarry with us for a while, and be not in such haste to go forward." "Nay," said King Arthur, "I may not tarry with ye, fair ladies, for I am bent upon an adventure, which ye wot right well, when I tell ye that I seek the Sable Knight who hath overcome so many other knights, and hath taken away their shields. So I do pray thee of your grace for to tell me where I may find him." "Grace of heaven," cried she who spake for the others, "this is certainly a sorry adventure which ye seek, Sir Knight, for already in these 2 days have 2 knights essayed with that knight, and both have fallen into great pain and disregard. Nevertheless, an thou wilt undertake this peril, yet shalt thou not go until thou hast eaten and refreshed thyself." So saying, she lifted a little ivory whistle that hung from her neck by a chain of gold, and blew upon it very shrilly. In answer to this summons, there came forth from the castle 3 fair young pages, clad all in flame-colored raiment, bearing among them a silver table covered with a white napkin, and after them came 5 other pages of the same appearance, bearing flagons of white wine, and red, dried fruits, comfits, and manchets of white fair bread. Then King Arthur descended from his war-horse with great gladness, for he was both hungry and athirst, and, seating himself at the table with the damsels beside him, he ate with great enjoyment, discoursing pleasantly all the while with those fair ladies, who listened to him with great cheerfulness of spirit. Yet he told them not who he was, though they greatly marveled who might be a noble warrior who had come thus into that place. So, having satisfied his hunger and his thirst, King Arthur mounted his steed again, and the 3 damsels conducted him across the valley a little way, he riding upon his horse, and they walking beside him. So by and by he perceived that there was a dark pathway that led to the further side of the forest land, and when he had come thither, the lady who had addressed him before said to him, "Yonder is the way thou must take if thou wouldst enter upon this adventure. So fare thee well, and may good hap go with thee, for certes thou art the knight most pleasant of address who hath come hitherward for a very long time." Thereupon King Arthur, having saluted those ladies right courteously, rode away with very great joy of that pleasant adventure through which he had thus passed. Now when King Arthur had gone some ways, he came by and by to a certain place where charcoal burners plied their trade, for here were many mounds of earth, all asmoke with the smouldering logs within, whilst all the air was filled with the smell of dampening fires. As the king approached this spot, he presently beheld that something was toward that was sadly amiss, for in an open clearing he beheld 3 sooty fellows with long knives in their hands, who pursued one old man, whose beard was as white as snow, and he beheld that the reverend old man, who was clad richly in black, and whose horse stood at a little distance, was running hither and thither, as though to escape from those wicked men, and he appeared to be very hard pressed and in great danger of his life. "Pardie," quoth the young king to himself, "here, certes, is one in sore need of succor." Whereupon he cried out in a great voice, "Hold, villains, what would you be at?" And therewith set spurs to his horse, and dropped his spear into rest, and drove down upon them with a noise like thunder for loudness. But when the 3 wicked fellows beheld the armed knight thus thundering down upon them, they straightway dropped their knives, and with loud outcries of fear ran away hither and thither until they escaped into the thickets of the forest, where one upon a horse might not hope to pursue them. Whereupon, having driven away those wicked fellows, King Arthur rode up to him who he had succored, thinking to offer him condolence. And behold, when he had come nigh to him, he perceived that the old man was none other than the enchanter Merlin. Yet whence he had so suddenly come, who had only a little while before been at the king's court at Caerleon, and what he did in that place, the king in no wise understand. Wherefore he bespoke the enchanter in this wise: "Ha, Merlin! It seemeth to me that I have saved thy life, for surely thou hadst not escaped from the hands of those wicked men had I not happened to come hitherward at this time." "Oh, dost thou think so, lord?" said Merlin. "Now let me tell thee that I did maybe appear to be in danger, yet I may have saved myself very easily had I been in mind to do so. But as thou sawest me in this seeming peril, so may thou know that a real peril far greater than this lieth before thee, and there will be no errant knight to succor thee from it. Wherefore, I pray thee, lord, for to take me with thee upon this adventure that thou art set upon. For I do tell thee that thou shalt certainly suffer great dole and pain therein." "Merlin," said King Arthur, "even if I were to face my death, yet would I not turn back from this adventure. But touching the advice thou givest me, meseemeth that it be very well to take with me, if so such peril lieth before me as thou sayest." And Merlin said, "Yea, it would be very well for thee to do so." So Merlin mounted upon his palfrey, and King Arthur and he betook their way from that place in pursuit of that adventure which the king hath undertaken to perform. So King Arthur and Merlin rode together through the forest for a considerable while, until they perceived they must be approaching nigh to the place where dwelt the Sable Knight, whom the knight sought so diligently. For the forest, which had till been altogether a wilderness, very deep and mossy, began to show an aspect more thin and open, as though a dwelling place of mankind was close at hand. And after a little they beheld before them a violent stream of water that rushed through a dark and dismal glen, and likewise they perceived that across the stream of water there was a bridge of stone, and that upon the other side of the bridge there was a smooth and level lawn of green grass, whereon knights contestants might joust very well. And beyond this lawn they beheld a tall forbidding castle with smooth walls and a straight tower, and this castle was built upon the rocks that might appear to be altogether part of the stone. So they wist that this must be the castle whereof the page and Sir Griflet had spoken. For midway upon the bridge they beheld that there hung a sable shield and brass maul, exactly as the page and Sir Griflet had said, and that upon the further side of the stream was the apple tree, and amid the leaves which hung a very great many shields of various devices, exactly as those two had reported. And they beheld that some of those shields were clean and fair, and that some were foul and stained with blood, and that some were smooth and unbroken, while others were cleft as though by knife and knight. And all those shields were of the shields of different knights whom the sable knight, who dwelt within the castle, had overthrown in battle with his own hand. "Splendor of paradise," quoth King Arthur, "that must indeed be a very valiant knight who with his own single strength hath overthrown and cast down so many other knights. For indeed, Merlin, there must be at least 100 shields hanging in yonder tree." Unto this Merlin made reply, "And thou, Lord, mayest be very happy, and thy shields too hangeth not there, and the sun goeth down this eventide." "That," said King Arthur with a very steadfast countenance, "shall be as God willeth. For certes I have a greater mind than ever for to try my power against yonder knight. For consider, what especial honor would fall me should I overcome so valiant a warrior as this same sable champion appeareth to be, seeing that he hath been victorious over so many other good knights." Thereupon, having spoken his mind, King Arthur immediately pushed forward his horse, and so, coming upon the bridge, he clearly read the challenge written letters of red beneath the shield. "Whoso smiteth this shield doeth so at his peril." Upon reading these words, the king seized the brazen maul, and smote that shield so violent a blow that the sound thereof echoed back from the smooth walls of the castle, and from the rocks whereon it stood, and from the skirts of the forest and around about, as though 12 other shields had been struck in those several places. And in answer to that sound, the portcullis of the castle was immediately let fall, and there issued forth a knight, very huge of frame and clad in sable armor. And likewise all of his apparel and the trappings of his horse were entirely of sable, so that he presented a most grim and forbidding aspect. And this sable knight came across that level meadow of smooth grass with a very stately and honorable gait, for neither did he ride in haste, nor did he ride slowly, but with great pride and haughtiness of mind, as became a champion who happily had never yet been overcome in battle. So reached the bridgehead, he drew rein, and saluted King Arthur with great dignity, and also right hotly. "Ha, Sir Knight," quoth he, "why didst thou, having read those words on yonder inscribed, smite upon my shield? Now I do tell thee that, for thy discourtesy, I shall presently take thy shield away from thee, and shall hang it upon yonder apple tree, where thou beholdest all those other shields to be hanging. Wherefore, either deliver thou thy shield unto me without more ado, or else prepare to defend it with thy person, in which event thou shalt certainly suffer great pain and discomfort to thy body." "Gramercy for the choice thou hast granted me," said King Arthur. "But as for taking my shield, I do believe that shall be as heaven willeth, and thou not as thou willest. Now, thy unkind knight, that I have come hither for no other purpose than to do battle with thee, and so to endeavor to redeem of my person with those shields that hang upon yonder apple tree. So make thou ready straightway, that I might have to do with thee, maybe to thy great disadvantage." "That will I so," replied the sable knight. And thereupon he turned his horse's head, and riding back a certain distance across the level lawn, he took stand in such place as appeared to him to be convenient. And so did King Arthur ride forth also upon that lawn, and take his station as seemed to him to be convenient. Then each knight dressed his spear and his shield for the encounter, and having thus made ready for the assault, each shouted to his war horse and drave his spurs deep into its flank. Then those two noble steeds rushed forth like lightning, coursing across the ground with such violent speed that the earth trembled and shook beneath them, and as it were by the cause of an earthquake. So those two knights met fairly in the midst of the center of the field, crashing together like a thunderbolt. And so violently did they smite one against the other that the spears burst into splinters, even unto the guard and the truncheon thereof, and the horses of the riders staggered back from the onset, so that only because of their extraordinary address of the knight's rider did they recover from falling before the shock of meeting. But with great spirit these two knights uplifted each his horse with his own spirit, and so completed his course in safety. And indeed King Arthur was very much amazed he had not overthrown his opponent, for at that time, as foresaid, he was considered to be the very best knight, and one of the best approved in deeds of arms that lived in all of Britain. Wherefore he marveled at that power in the address of that knight against whom he had driven, that he had not been overthrown by the greatness of the blow that had been delivered against his defenses. So when they met again in the midst of the field, King Arthur gave that knight greeting, and bespoke him with great courtesy, addressing him in this wise: Sir Knight, I know not who thou art, but I do pledge my knightly word that thou art the most potent knight that I ever met in all my life. Now I bid thee, get down straight away from thy horse, and let us two fight this battle with sword and upon foot, for it would be a pity to let it end in this way. Not so, quoth the Sable Knight, not so, nor until one of us twain be overthrown will I contest this battle upon foot. And upon this he shouted, Ho ho! in a very loud voice, and straightway thereupon the gateway of the castle opened, and there came running forth two tall squires, clad in black, pied with crimson, and each of these squires bare in his hands a great spear of ashwood, new and well seasoned, and never yet stained in battle. So King Arthur chose one of these spears, and the Sable Knight took the other, and thereupon each returned to that station wherefrom he had been before they essayed the encounter. Then once again each knight rushed his steed into the assault, and once again did each smite so fairly in the midst of the defense of the other that the spears were splintered, so that only the guard and the truncheon thereof remained in the grasp of the knight who held it. Then, as before, King Arthur would have fought the battle out with swords and upon foot, but again the Sable Knight would not have it so, but called aloud upon those within the castle, whereupon there immediately came forth two other esquires with fresh new spears of ashwood. So each knight again took him a spear, armed himself therewith, and chose each his station upon that fair level lawn of grass. And so for the third time, having thus prepared themselves thereof assault, those two excellent knights hurled themselves together in furious battle. And now, as twice before, did King Arthur strike the Sable Knight so fairly in the center of his defense that the spear which he held was burst into splinters. But this time, the spear of the Sable Knight did not so break in that manner, but held, and so violent was the blow that he delivered upon King Arthur's shield that he pierced through the center of it. Then the girths of the king's saddle burst apart by that great and powerful blow, and both he and his steed were cast violently backward. So King Arthur might have been overcast had he not voided his saddle with extraordinary skill and knightly address. Wherefore, though his horse was overthrown, he himself held his footing and did not fall into the dust. Nevertheless, so violent was the blow that he received that for a little space he was altogether bereft of his senses, so that everything whirled about before his eyes. But when his sight returned to him, he was filled with an anger so vehement that it appeared to him as though all the blood in his heart had rushed into his brains, so that he saw naught but red, as blood before his eyes. And when this also had passed, he perceived the Sable Knight, that he and his horse at no great distance. Then immediately King Arthur ran to him, and catching the bridle rein of his horse, he cried out aloud that the Sable Knight with great violence, Come down, thou Black Knight, and fight me upon foot with thy sword. That I will not do, said the Sable Knight, for lo, I have overthrown thee. Wherefore deliver thou thy shield, that I might hang it upon yonder apple tree, and go thy way as others have done before thee. That I will not, cried King Arthur with exceeding passion. Neither will I yield myself to you, nor go hence, until thou or I have altogether conquered the other. Thereupon he thrust the horse of the Sable Knight backward by the bridle rein so vehemently that the other was constrained to void his saddle to save himself from being overthrown upon the ground. And now each knight was entirely as furious as the other, wherefore each drew his sword and dressed his shield, and thereupon rushed together like two wild bulls in battle. They foined, they smote, they traced, they parried, they struck again and again, and the sounds of their blows crashing and clashing upon one another filled the entire surrounding space with an extraordinary uproar. Nor may any man altogether conceive of the entire fury of that encounter, for because of the violence of the blows which one delivered upon the other, whole cantels of armor were hewn from their bodies, and many deep and grievous wounds were given and received, so that the armor of each was altogether stained with red because of the blow that flooded down upon them. At last King Arthur, waxing, as it were, entirely mad, struck so fierce a blow that no armor could have withstood the stroke, that he had fallen fairly upon it. But it befell at that stroke that his sword broke at the hilt, and the blade thereof flew into 3 several pieces into the air. Yet as the stroke so wonderfully fierce that the Sable Knight groaned and staggered, and ran about in a circle as though he had gone blind and knew not whither to direct his steps. But presently he recovered himself again, and perceiving King Arthur standing nearby, and not knowing that his enemy now had no sword to defend himself with, he cast aside his shield, and took his own sword into both hands, and therewith smote so dolorous a stroke that he clave through King Arthur's shield, and through his helmet, and even into the bone of his brainpan. Then King Arthur thought he had received his death wound, for his brains swam like water, his thighs trembled exceedingly, and he sank down to his knees, whilst the blood and sweat commingled together in the darkness of his helmet, flowed down into his eyes in a lather and blinded him. Thereupon, seeing him thus grievously hurt, the Sable Knight called upon him with great vehemence for to yield himself and to surrender his shield, because he is now too sorely wounded for to fight any more. But King Arthur would not yield himself, but catching the other by the sword belt, he lifted himself to his feet. Then, being in a manner recovered from his amazement, he embraced the other with both arms, and placing his knee behind the thigh of that of the Saber Knight, he cast him backwards down upon the ground so violently the sound of the fall was astounding to hear. And with that fall the Sable Knight was, a while, entirely bereft of consciousness. Then King Arthur straightway unlaced the helm of the Sable Knight, and so beheld his face. And he knew him in spite of the blood that still ran down his countenance in great quantities. And he knew that knight was King Pellinore, aforenamed in this history, who had twice warred against King Arthur. Now, when King Arthur beheld whom it was against whom he had done battle, he cried out loud, "Ha, Pellinore! Is it then thou? Now yield thee to me, for thou art entirely at my mercy." And upon this, he drew his misericordia, and set the point thereof at King Pellinore's throat. But by now King Pellinore had greatly recovered from his fall, and perceiving that the blood was flowing down in great measure from his enemy's helmet, he wist that the other must have been sorely wounded by the blow which he had just now received. Wherefore he catched King Arthur's wrist in his hand, and directed the point of the dagger away from his throat, so that no great danger threatened therefrom. And indeed, with his sore wound and with the loss of blood, King Arthur was now fallen exceedingly sick and faint, so that it appeared to him that he was nigh to death. Accordingly, it was that no great ado that King Pellinore suddenly heaved himself up from the ground, and so overthrew his enemy that King Arthur was now underneath his knees. And by this King Pellinore was exceedingly mad with the fury of the sore battle he had fought, for he was so enraged that his eyes were all beshot with blood like those of a wild boar, and froth like the champings of a wild boar stood in the beard about his lips. Wherefore he wrenched the dagger out of his enemy's hand, and immediately began to unlace his helm, with intent to slay him where he lay. But at this moment Merlin came in great haste, crying out, "Stay, stay, Sir Pellinore! What would you be at? Stay your sacrilegious hand, for he who lieth beneath you is none other than King Arthur, king of all of this realm." At this King Pellinore was astonished beyond measure, and for a little while he was silent, and then after he cried out in a loud voice, "Say you so, old man? Then verily your words have doomed this man unto death, for no one in all this world hath ever suffered such ill and wrongs as I have suffered at his hands. For lo, he hath taken from me power, and kingship, and honours, and estates, and he hath left me only this gloomy dismal castle of the forest as an abiding place. Wherefore, seeing that he is thus in my power, he shall now presently die, if for no other reason than because if I now let him go free, he will certainly revenge himself when he hath recovered from all the ill he hath suffered at my hands." Then Merlin said, "Not so, he shall not die at thy hands, for I myself shall save him." Whereupon he uplifted his staff, and smote King Pellinore across the shoulders. Then immediately King Pellinore fell down, and lay upon the ground on his face like one who had suddenly gone dead. Upon this King Arthur uplifted himself upon his elbow, and beheld his enemy lying there, as though dead, and he cried out, "Ha, Merlin, what is this thou hast done? I am very sorry, for I do perceive that thou, by thy arts of magic, hath slain one of the best knights in all the world." "Not so, my lord king," said Merlin, "for in sooth I tell thee that thou art far nigher to thy death than he, for he is but in a sleep, and will soon awaken. But thou art in such a case that it would only take a very little for to cause thee to die." And indeed King Arthur was exceedingly sick, even to the heart, with the sore wound he had received, so that it was only with much ado that Merlin would help him upon his horse. Having done the which, and having hung the king's shield upon the horn of his saddle, Merlin straightway conveyed the wounded man thence across the bridge, and, leading the horse by the bridle, so took him into the forest. Now I must tell you that there was in that part of the forest a certain hermit, so holy that the wild birds of the woodland would come and rest upon his hands while he read his bravery, and so sanctified was he in gentleness that the wild does would come to the door of his hermitage, and there stand whilst he milked them for his refreshment. And this hermit dwelt in that part of the forest so remote from the habitations of man, that when he rang the bell for matins or for vespers, there was hardly ever anyone to hear the sound thereof, excepting the wild creatures that dwelt thereabout. Yet, nevertheless, to this remote and lonely place, royal folk and others of high degree would sometimes come as though on pilgrimage, because of the hermit's exceeding saintliness. So Merlin conveyed King Arthur unto this sanctuary, and having reached that place, he and the hermit lifted the wounded man down from his saddle, and the hermit giving words of pity and sorrow, and together they conveyed him to the holy man's cell. There they laid upon him a couch of moss, and unlaced his armor, and searched his wounds, and bathed him with pure water, and dressed his hurts, for the hermit was a very skillful leech. So for all that day and part of the next, King Arthur lay upon the hermit's pallet like one about to die, for he beheld all things about him as though through thin water, and the breath hung about his lips and fluttered, and he could not even lift his head from the pallet because of the weakness that lay upon him. Now upon the afternoon of the second day, there came a great noise and tumult in that part of the forest. For it happened that Lady Guinevere of Camelard, together with her court, both of ladies and of knights, had come upon a pilgrimage to that holy man, the fame of whose saintliness had reached even to that place where she had dwelt. For that lady had a favourite page who was very sick of a fever, and she trusted the holy man might give her some charm or amulet by the virtue of which he might happily be cured. Wherefore she had come to that place with her entire court, so that all part of the forest was made gay with fine raiment, and the silence thereof was made merry with the sound of talk and laughter, and the singing of songs, and the chattering of voices, and the neighing of horses. And the Lady Guinevere rode in the midst of her damsels and her court, and her beauty outshone the beauty of her damsels as the splendor of the morning star outshines that of the lesser stars that surround it. For then and afterward she was held by all the courts of chivalry to be the most beautiful lady in all the world. Now when the Lady Guinevere had come to that place, she perceived the milk-white war-horse of King Arthur where it stood cropping the green grass of the open glade nigh to the hermitage. And likewise she perceived Merlin where he stood beside the door of the cell. So of him she demanded whose was that noble war-horse that stood browsing upon the grass at that lonely place, and who it was that lay within the cell. And unto her Merlin made answer, Lady, he who lieth within is a knight, very sorely wounded, so that he is sick nigh unto death. Pity of heaven, cried the Lady Guinevere, what a sad thing is this thou tellest me. Now I do beseech thee to lead me presently unto that knight, that I might behold him. For I have in my court a very skilful leech, who is well used to the cure of hurts, such as knights receive in battle. So Merlin brought the lady into the cell, and there she beheld King Arthur where he lay stretched upon the pallet. And she wist not who he was. Yet it appeared to her that in all her life she had not beheld so noble appearing a knight as he who lay sorely wounded in that lonely place. And King Arthur cast his looks upward to where she stood beside his bed of pain, surrounded by her maidens, and in the great weakness that lay upon him, he wist not whether she whom he beheld was a mortal lady, or whether she was not rather some tall straight angel, who had descended from one of the lordly courts of paradise for to visit him in his pain and distress. And the Lady Guinevere was filled with a great pity at beholding King Arthur's sorrowful estate. Wherefore she called to her that skilful leech who was in her court, and she bade him bring a certain alabaster box of exceedingly precious balsam. And she commanded him to search that knight's wounds, and to anoint them with the balsam, so that he might be healed of his hurts with all dispatch. So that wise and skilful leech did according to the Lady Guinevere's commands, and immediately King Arthur felt entire ease of all of his aches and great content of spirit. And when the lady in her court had departed, he found himself much uplifted in heart, and 3 days thereafter he was entirely healed, and was as well and strong and lusty as he had ever been in all his life. And this was the first time that King Arthur ever beheld that beautiful lady, the Lady Guinevere of Camelard, and from that time forth he never forgot her, but she was almost always present in his thoughts. Wherefore he had recovered, he had thus said to himself, I will forget that I am a king, and I will cherish the thought of this lady, and will serve her faithfully as a good knight may serve his chosen dame. And so he did, as ye shall hear later in this story. Now, as soon as King Arthur had, by means of that extraordinary balsam, been healed thus of those grievous wounds which he had received in his battle with King Pellinore, he found himself to be moved by a most vehement desire to meet his enemy again, for to try issue of battle with him once more, and so recover the credit which he had lost in that combat. Now upon the morning of the 4th day, being entirely cured, and having broken his fast, he walked for the refreshment beside the skirts of the forest, listening the while to the cheerful sound of the wood-birds singing their matins, all with might and main. And Merlin walked beside him, and King Arthur spake his mind to Merlin, concerning his intent to engage once more in a knightly contest with Sir Pellinore. And he said, Merlin, it doth vex me very sorely to have come off so ill in my late encounter with King Pellinore. Certes, he is the very best knight in all the world whom I have yet encountered. Nevertheless, I might have fared differently with me had I not broken my sword, and so left myself altogether defenceless in that respect. Whosoever that may be, I am of thy mind to essay this adventure once more, and so will I do immediately as may be. Thereunto Merlin made reply, Thou art assuredly a very brave man to have much so appetite for battle, seeing as now thou camest unto thy death not even 4 days ago. Yet how mayest thou hope to undertake this adventure without due preparation? For lo, thou hast no sword, nor hast thou a spear, nor hast thou even thy miscordia for to do battle with. How then mayest thou hope for to essay this adventure? And King Arthur said, That I know not. Nevertheless, I will presently seek for some weapon as soon as may be. For even I have no better weapon than an oaken cudgel, Yet I would essay this battle again with so poor a tool as that. Ha, Lord, said Merlin, I do perceive that thou art altogether fixed in thy purpose for to renew this quarrel. Wherefore I will not seek to stay thee therefrom, but will do so in all times me lies for to aid thee in thy desires. Now to this end I must tell thee that in one part of this forest, which is indeed a very strange place, there is a certain woodland sometimes called a roy, and other times called the Forest of Adventure. For no knight who ever entereth therein but of some adventure befallen him. And close to a roy is a land of enchantment, which has several times been seen, and that is a very wonderful land, for there in it is a wide and considerable lake, which is also of enchantment. And in the center of that lake there hath for some time been seen the appearance of a woman's arm, exceedingly beautiful and clad in white samite, and in the hand of this arm holdeth the sword of such exceeding excellence and beauty, that no Merlin telleth ye hath ever beheld its like. And the name of this sword is Excalibur, it being so named by those who have beheld it because of its marvelous brightness and beauty. For it hath come to pass that several knights have already seen that sword, and have endeavored to obtain it for their own. But heretofore no one hath been able to touch it, and many have lost their lives in that adventure. For any man who draweth unto it, either he sinks into the lake, or else the arm disappeareth entirely, for else it is withdrawn beneath the lake. Wherefore no man hath ever been able to attain the possession of that sword. Now I am able to conduct thee unto the lake of the enchantment, and there thou mayest see Excalibur with thine own eyes. Then when thou hast seen him, thou mayest happily have thy desire to obtain him, which an thou art able to do, thou wilt have a sword very fitted for to do battle with. Merlin, quoth the king, this is a very strange thing which thou tellest me. Now I am desirous beyond measure to attempt to obtain this sword for mine own. Wherefore I do beseech thee, lead me with all dispatch to this enchanted lake, whereof thou tellest me. And Merlin said, I will do so. So that morning King Arthur and Merlin took leave of that holy hermit, the king having kneeled in the grass to receive his benediction. And so, departing from that place, they entered the deeper forest once more, betaking their way to that part which was known as a roy. And after a while they came to a roy, and it was about noontide. When they had entered into those woodlands, they came across a certain little open place, and in that place they beheld a white doe with a golden collar about its neck. And King Arthur said, Look, Merlin, yonder is a wonderful soft. And Merlin said, Let us follow that doe. And upon this the doe turned, and they followed it. And by, in following it, they came to an opening in the trees, where there was a little lawn of sweet soft grass. And here they beheld a bower, and before the bower was a table spread with a fair white cloth, and set with refreshments of white bread, wine, and meats of several sorts. And at the door of this bower there stood a page, clad all in green, and with his hair as black as ebony, and his eyes as black as jet, and exceedingly bright. And when this page beheld King Arthur and Merlin, he gave them greeting, and welcomed the king very pleasantly, saying, Ha, King Arthur, thou art welcome to this place. Now I pray thee dismount and refresh yourself before going further. Then was King Arthur a doubt as to whether there might be of some enchantment in this, or for to work an ill, for he was astonished that the page in a deep forest should know him so well. But Merlin bade him a good cheer, and said, Indeed, Lord, thou mayest freely partake in that refreshment, which I may tell thee was prepared especially for thee. Moreover, in this thou mayest foretell a very happy issue unto this adventure. So King Arthur sat down to the table with a great comfort of heart, and that page and another like unto him administered unto his needs, serving him all the food upon silver plates, and all wine in golden goblets, as he was used to being served in his own court, only that those things were much more cunningly wrought and fashioned, and were more beautiful than the table furniture of the king's court. Then, after he had eaten his fill and washed his hands from a silver basin which the first page offered to him, and had wiped his hands upon a fine linen napkin which the other page had brought unto him, and after Merlin had also refreshed himself, they went their way, greatly rejoicing at this pleasant adventure, which seemed to the king could not be betoken a very good issue to this undertaking. Now about the middle of the afternoon, King Arthur and Merlin came of a sudden out of the forest and upon a fair and level plain, bedight all over with such a number of flowers that no man could conceive of their quantity or of the beauty thereof. And this was a very wonderful land, for lo, all the air appeared as it were to be of gold, so bright was it so singularly radiant. And here and there upon that plain were sundry trees all in blossom, and the fragrance of the blossoms were so sweet that the king had never smelt any fragrance like to it. And in the branches of those trees were a multitude of birds of many colors, and the melody of their singing ravished the heart of the hearer. And midway in the plain was a lake of water so bright as silver, and all about the borders of the lake were incredible numbers of lilies and daffodils. Yet, although this place was so exceedingly fair, there was, nevertheless, nowhere about it a single sign of human life of any sort, but it appeared altogether as lonely as the hollow sky upon a day of summer. So because of all the marvelous beauty of this place, and because of its strangeness and its entire solitude, King Arthur perceived that he must have come into the land of powerful enchantment, wherefore happily dwelt a fairy of very exalted quality, wherefore his spirit was enwrapped in a manner of fear, as he pushed his great milk-white war-horse through the long fair grass, all bedight with flowers, and he wist not what strange things were about to befall him. So when he had come unto the margin of the lake, he beheld there the miracle that Merlin had told him of aforetime. For lo, in the midst of the expanse of the water, there was of the appearance of a fair and beautiful arm, as of a woman, clad all in white samite, and the arm was encircled with several bracelets of wrought gold, and the hand held a sword of marvelous workmanship, aloft in the air above the surface of the water, and neither the arm nor the sword moved as much as a hair's breadth, but were motionlessness, like a carven image upon the surface of the lake. And behold, the sun of that strange land shone down upon the hilt of the sword, and it was of pure gold beset with jewels of several sorts, so that the hilt of the sword and the bracelets that encircled the arm glistened in the midst of the lake like some singular star of exceeding splendor. And King Arthur sat upon his war-horse, and gazed from a distance at the arm and the sword, and he greatly marvelled thereat. Yet he wist not how he might come to that sword, for the lake was wonderfully wide and deep, wherefore he knew not how he might come thereunto for to make it his own. And as he sat pondering this thing within himself, he was suddenly aware of a strange lady who approached him through those tall flowers that bloomed along the margin of the lake. And when he had perceived her coming toward him, he quickly dismounted from his war-horse, and he went forward to meet her with his bridle rein over his arm. And he had come nigh to her, he perceived that she was extraordinarily beautiful, and that her face was like wax for cleanness, and that her eyes were perfectly black, and that they were as bright and glistening as though they were two jewels set in ivory. And he perceived that her hair was like silk, and as black as it was possible to be, and as so long as it reached to the ground as she walked. And the lady was clad all in green, only a fine cord of crimson and gold was interwoven into the plaits of her hair, and around her neck there hung a very beautiful necklace of several strands of opal stones and emeralds, set in cunningly wrought gold, and around her wrists were bracelets of the like sort, of opal stones and emeralds set in gold. So when King Arthur beheld her wonderful appearance, that it was like an ivory statue of exceeding beauty, clad all in green, he immediately knelt before her in the midst of all these flowers, and he said, I do certainly perceive that thou art no mortal damsel, but that thou art fay, also that this place, because of its extraordinary beauty, can be of no other than some land of faery to which I have entered. And the lady replied, King Arthur, thou sayest soothly, for I am indeed fairy. Moreover, I may tell thee that my name is Nimue, and that I am the chiefest of those ladies of the lake, of whom thou mayest have heard people speak. Also, thou art to know what thou beholdest yonder as a wide lake is, in truth, a plain like unto this, all bedight with flowers. And likewise, thou art to know that in the midst of that plain there standeth a castle of white marble and ultramarine illuminated with gold. But, lest mortal eyes should behold our dwelling place, my sisters and I have caused it to be that this appearance as a lake should extend all over the castle, so that it is entirely hidden from sight, nor may any mortal man cross that lake, saving in one way, otherwise he shall certainly perish therein. Lady, said King Arthur, that which thou tellest me causes me to wonder a very great deal, and indeed I am afraid that in coming hitherward I have been doing amiss for to intrude upon the solitude of your dwelling place. Nay, not so, King Arthur, said the Lady of the Lake, for in truth thou art very welcome hereunto. Moreover, I will tell thee I have a greater friendliness for thee and those noble knights of thy court than thou canst easily wot of. But I do beseech thee of thy courtesy for to tell me what it is that thou bringest thee to our land. Lady, quoth the king, I will tell thee the entire truth. I fought of late in a battle with a certain sable knight, in the which I was sorely and grievously wounded, and wherein I burst my spear and snapped my sword, and lost even my misericordia, so that I had not a single thing left me by way of a weapon. In this extremity, Merlin here told me of Excalibur, and of how he is continually upheld by an arm in the midst of a magical lake. So I came hither, and behold, I find it is even as he hath said. Now, lady, an it be possible, I would fain achieve that excellent sword, that by means of it I might fight my battle to its entire end. Ha, my lord king, quoth the Lady of the Lake, that sword is no easy thing for to achieve. And moreover, I may tell thee that several knights have lost their lives by attempting that which thou hast mind to do. For in sooth, no man may win yonder sword unless he be without fear and without reproach. Alas, lady, quoth King Arthur, that is indeed a sad saying for me. For though I may not lack in knightly courage, yet in truth there be many things therewith I do reproach myself withal. Nevertheless, I would fain attempt this thing, even if it be to my great endangerment. Wherefore, I prithee, tell me how I may best undertake this adventure. King Arthur, said the Lady of the Lake, I will do what I say to aid thee in thy wishes in this matter. Whereupon she lifted a single emerald that hung by a small chain of gold at her girdle, and lo, the emerald was cunningly carved into the form of a whistle, and she set the whistle to her lips and blew upon it very shrilly. Then straightway there appeared upon the water, a great way off, a certain thing that shone very brightly. And this drew near with great speed, and as it came nigh, behold, it was a boat all of carven brass, and the brow of the boat was carved in the form of a head of a beautiful woman, and upon either side were wings like the wings of a swan, and the boat moved upon the water like a swan, very swiftly, so that long lines like silver threads stretched far away behind across the face of the water, which otherwise was unto like glass for smoothness. And when the brazen boat had reached the bank, it rested there, and moved no more. Then the Lady of the Lake bade King Arthur to enter the boat, and he so entered it. And immediately as he had done so, the boat moved away from the bank as swiftly as it had come thither, and Merlin and the Lady of the Lake stood upon the margin of the water, and gazed after King Arthur in the brazen boat. And King Arthur beheld that the boat floated swiftly across the lake to where was the arm uplifting the sword, and that the arm and the sword moved not, but remained where they were. Then King Arthur reached forth and took the sword in his hand, and immediately the arm disappeared beneath the water, and King Arthur held the sword in the scabbard thereof, and obtained the belt thereof in his hand, and lo, they were his own. Then verily his heart swelled with joy that it would burst from his bosom, for Excalibur was 100 times more beautiful than that which he had thought possible, wherefore his heart was nigh breaking for pure joy at having obtained that magic sword. Then the brazen boat bore him very quickly back to the land again, and he stepped ashore where stood the Lady of the Lake and Merlin. And when he stood upon the shore, he gave the Lady of the Lake thanks beyond measure for all she had done, and for to aid him in this great undertaking, and she gave him cheerful and pleasing words in reply. Then King Arthur saluted the lady, as became him, and having mounted his war horse, and Merlin having mounted his palfrey, they rode away thence upon their business. The king's heart still greatly expanded with pure delight at having for his own that beautiful sword, the most beautiful and most famous sword in all the world. That night King Arthur and Merlin abided with the holy hermit in the forest sanctuary, and when the next morning had come, they took their departure, offering thanks to that saintly man for the harborage he had given them. Anon, about noontide, they reached the valley of the Sable Knight, and there were all the things appointed exactly as when King Arthur had been there before, to wit, that gloomy castle, the lawn of smooth grass, the apple tree covered over with shields, and the bridge whereupon hung that single shield of sable. Now Merlin, quoth King Arthur, I do this time most strictly forbid thee for to interfere in this quarrel, nor shalt thou, under pain of my displeasure, exert any of thy arts of magic in my behalf. So hearken thou what I say, and heed it with all possible diligence. Thereupon, straightway, the king rode forth upon the bridge, and seizing the brazen maul, he smote upon the sable shield with all his might and main. Immediately the portcullis of the castle was let fall, as foretold, and in the same manner as that of the other time, the Sable Knight rode forth therefrom, already bedight and equipped for the encounter. So when he came to the bridge head, and there King Arthur spake to him in this wise, Sir Pellinore, we do now know one another entirely well, and each doth judge that he hath cause of quarrel with the other. Thou that I, for mine own reasons, as seemed to be fit, have taken away from thee thy kingly estate, and that have driven thee into the forest of solitude. I, that thou hast set thyself up here for to do injury and affront to knights and lords and other people of this kingdom of mine. Wherefore, seeing that I am here as an errant knight, I do challenge thee to fight with me, man to man, until either thou or I have conquered the other. Unto this speech King Pellinore bowed his head in obedience, and thereupon he wheeled his horse, and riding some little distance, took his place where he had afore stood. And King Arthur also rode out some little distance, and took his station where he had afore stood. At the same time there came forth from the castle one of those tall pages, clad all in sable, pled with crimson, and gave King Arthur a good stout spear of ashwood, well seasoned and untried in battle. And when the two knights were duly prepared, they shouted and drave their horses together, the one smiting the other so fairly in the midst of his defenses that the spears shivered in the hands of each, bursting all into small splinters as they had aforetime done. Then each of these two knights immediately voided his horse with great skill and address, and drew each his sword, and thereupon they fell to at a combat, so furious and so violent that two wild bulls upon the mountains could not have engaged in a more desperate encounter. But now, having Excalibur for to aid him in his battle, King Arthur soon overcame his enemy, for he gave him several wounds and yet received none himself, nor did he shed a single drop of blood in all that fight, though his enemy's armor was in little while all stained with crimson. And at last King Arthur delivered so vehement a blow that King Arthur was entirely benumbed thereby, wherefore his sword and his shield fell down from their defense, his thighs trembling beneath him, and he sank unto his knees upon the ground. Then he called upon King Arthur to have mercy, saying, "Halt! Spare my life, and I will yield myself unto thee." And King Arthur said, "I will spare thee, and I will do more than that. For now thou hast yielded thyself unto me, lo, I will restore upon thee thy power and estate. For I bear no ill will toward thee, Pellinore. Nevertheless, I can brook no rebels against my power in this realm. For as God judges me, I do declare that I hold singly in my sight the good of the people in my kingdom. Wherefore, he who is against me is also against them, and he who is against them is also against me. But now that thou hast acknowledged me, I will take thee into my favor. Only as a pledge of thy good faith toward me in the future, I shall require it of thee that thou shalt send me a hostage of thy good will. Thy two eldest sons, to wit, Sir Eglaval and Sir Lamorak. Thy young son, Dornar, thou mayest keep with thee for thy comfort." So those two young knights above mentioned came to the court of King Arthur, and they became very famous knights, and by were made fellows in great honor of the Round Table. And King Arthur and King Pellinore went together into the castle of King Pellinore, and there King Pellinore's wounds were dressed, and he was made comfortable. That night King Arthur abode in the castle of King Pellinore, and when the next morning had come, he and Merlin returned unto the court of the king, where it awaited him in the forest of that place where he had established it. Now King Arthur took very great pleasure unto himself as he and Merlin rode together and returned through the forest, for it was the leafiest time of the year, what time of the woodlands decked themselves in the best apparel of clear bright green. Each bosky dell and dingle was full of the perfume of the thickets, and the very tangled depth of the small bird sang with all his might and main, as though he would burst his little throat with the melody of his singing. And the ground beneath the horses' feet was so soft with the fragrant moss that the ear could not hear any sound of the hoofbeats upon the earth. And the bright yellow sunlight came through the leaves, so that all the ground was scattered over with great multitude of trembling circles of pure yellow gold. And anon that sunlight would fall down upon the armed knight as he rode, so that every little while his armor appeared to catch fire with a great glory, shining like a sudden bright star amid the bright shadows of the woodland. So it was that King Arthur took great joy in that forest land, for he was without ache or pain of any sort, and his heart was greatly elated from the wonderfulness of the success of that adventure into which he had entered. For in that adventure, not only had he won a very bitter enemy into a friend who should be of great usefulness and satisfaction to him, but likewise he obtained for himself a sword the like of which the world had never before held. And whenever he would think of that singularly splendid sword which now hung at his side, and whenever he remembered that land of faerie into which he had wandered, and which he had befallen him therein, his heart would become so greatly elated with pure joyfulness that he would hardly knew how to contain himself because of the great delight that filled his entire bosom. And, indeed, I know of no greater good that I could wish for you in all of your life than to have you enjoy such happiness as cometh to one who, when he hath done his best endeavor and hath succeeded with great entirety in his undertaking. For then all the world appears to be filled as with a bright and shining light, and the body seemeth to become so elated that the feet are uplifted from the heaviness and touch the earth very lightly because of the lightness of the spirit within. Wherefore it is that I could have it in my power to give to you the very best that the world hath to give. I would wish that you might win your battle as King Arthur won his battle at that time, and that you might ride homeward in such triumph and joyfulness as filled him that day, and that the sunlight might shine around you as it shone around him, and that the breeze might blow, and that all the little birds might sing with the might and main as they sang for him, and that your heart also might sing its song for rejoicing in the pleasantness of the world in which you live. Now, as they rode thus through the forest together, Merlin said to the king, "Lord, which wouldst thou rather have, Excalibur or the sheath that holds them?" To which King Arthur replied, 10,000 times would I rather have Excalibur than his sheath." "In that thou art wrong, my lord," said Merlin. "For let me tell thee, that though Excalibur is so great a temper that he may cut in twain either a feather or a bar of iron, yet is his sheath of such a good sort that he who wears it can suffer no wound in battle, neither may he lose a single drop of blood. In witness thereof, Thou mayest remember that, in thy late battle with King Pellinore, thou didst suffer no wound at all, neither didst thou lose any blood. Then King Arthur directed a countenance of great displeasure upon his companion, and he said, Now Merlin, I do declare that thou hast taken from me the entire glory of that battle which I have lately fought. For what credit may be there to any knight who fights his enemy by means of enchantment such as thou tellest me of? And indeed, I am minded to take this glorious sword back to that magic lake, and cast it therein where it belongeth. For I believe that a knight should fight by means of his own strength, and not by means of magic. My lord, said Merlin, assuredly thou art entirely right in what thou holdest, but thou must bear in mind that thou art not as an ordinary errant knight, but thou art a king, and that thy life belongeth not unto thee, but unto thy people. Accordingly, thou hast no right to imperil it, but shouldst thou all that lieth in that power for to preserve it. Wherefore thou shouldst keep that sword, so that it may safeguard thy life. Then King Arthur meditated that saying for a long while in silence, and when he spake it was in this wise, Merlin, thou art right in what thou sayest, and for the sake of my people I will keep both Excalibur for and to fight for them, and likewise his sheath for to preserve my life for their sake. Nevertheless, I will never use him again, saving in serious battle. And King Arthur held to that saying, so that thereafter he did no battle in sport excepting with lance and a horseback. King Arthur kept Excalibur as the chiefest treasure of all his possessions, for he said to himself, Such a sword as this is fit for a king above other kings, and a lord above other lords. Now as God hath seen fit for it to entrust that sword into my keeping, in so marvellous a manner as fell about, so must he mean that I am to be his servant for to do unusual things. Wherefore I will treasure this noble weapon, not more for its excellent worth, than because it shall be unto me as a sign of those great things that God, in his mercy, hath evidently ordained for me to perform for him to do him service. So King Arthur had made for Excalibur a strong chest or coffer, bound around with many bands of wrought iron, studded all over with great nails of iron, and locked with 3 great padlocks. In this strong box he kept Excalibur lying upon a cushion of crimson silk, and wrapped in swathings of fine linen. And very few people ever beheld the sword in its glory, excepting when it shone like a sudden flame in the uproar of battle. For when the time came for King Arthur to defend his realm or his subjects from their enemies, then he would take out the sword, and fasten it upon the side of his body. And when he did so, he was like unto a hero of God girt with a blade of shining lightning. Yea, at such times Excalibur shone with so terrible a brightness, that the very sight thereof would shake the spirits of every wrongdoer, with such great fear that he would, in a manner, suffer the pangs of death ere the edge of the blade had touched his flesh. So King Arthur treasured Excalibur, and the sword remained with him for all his life. Wherefore, the name of Arthur and of Excalibur are one. So I believe that that sword is the most famous of any that was ever seen or heard tell of in all the courts of chivalry. But as for the sheath of the blade, King Arthur lost that through the treachery of one who should, by rights, have been his dearest friend, and in the end, the loss of that miraculous sheath brought about it that he suffered a very great deal of pain and sorrow. All that also you shall hear of, God willing, in due season. So endeth the story of the winning of Excalibur, and may God give unto you in your life that you may have his truth to aid you, like a shining sword for to overcome your enemies. And may he give you faith, and may that faith heal your wounds of sorrow as the sheath of Excalibur healed all the wounds of him who wore that excellent weapon. For with truth and faith girded upon you, you shall be as well able to fight all your battles as did that noble hero of old, whom men call King Arthur.